Well, friends, welcome back in here to the How About That Dogs cast. And the one thing you know about what we have here is that we bring you a perspective and an angle on the games and the dogs that you're not going to get anywhere else. And boy, do we have that for you today. I reached out last week because I knew that this was going to be a big game between the Hedges against Ole Miss to somebody that I thought had a pretty good pulse of what's going on with the program. That would be Stephen Willis from the Locked On Ole Miss podcast. Stephen, how are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty excited as we record this. On Thursday. I need this to speed up. I need Saturday to get here because game day and everything. And it has a chance to be a pretty special day either way, really.
Yeah, there's one thing for sure. I mean, there are a few big games around the country, but this one's right there on the top tier for this weekend. I know that I'm looking forward to it as well. So let's get right into it. Now, dog fans, of course, are focused on the dogs, but when you have an opponent, a quality opponent, like the Rebels coming between the Hedges this weekend, we need to know a little bit more about how we got here. So from an Ole Miss Rebels perspective, let me know about your team and how it is that they're sitting here at 8-1 with a chance to shock the world on Saturday.
Well, the first thing everybody needs to remember is this is probably the most talented Ole Miss football team in the last 40 or 50 years. They're here because they're simply just better players on the football team. For instance, Jackson Dart, everybody knows Jackson Dart. He's putting up fantastic numbers. He's a former Gatorade National Player of the Year. And then you have Quinshon Judkins, who was a freshman first-team All-American at running back, and Trey Harris. And I'm sure everybody has seen highlights of what Trey Harris has done. And if Trey Harris plays against Alabama, there's probably a good chance that Ole Miss beats Alabama. And you have this Ole Miss team. Defensively, they're a little bit better with Pete Golding and what he is doing. But Jackson Dart's leadership and Quinshon Judkins, and it's at the point where I don't care who Ole Miss is playing. If Ole Miss gets the ball back at about 3 or 4 minutes to go in the game and they're down by 4 points, I know Ole Miss is going to get in the end zone. That is the type of team that this 8-1 Ole Miss team is, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, I mean, I had a chance to speak with Quinshon at SEC Media Days, and I came away from that experience just really impressed with the kind of young man that he is. And I was asking him about coming to Athens and that sort of thing. And just the way, when you're there, he's there to talk about his season and his team and that sort of thing. And for him to take time and answer a Georgia-specific question for me, I really appreciated that. So I don't have any doubt that the leadership is there with that group of young men. Now, you rattled off the three names that I was going to get to next, which would be Jackson Dart, the quarterback, Quinshon Judkins, who I believe is the best running back in the conference, and I would probably take him on my team as the best in the nation just because he's the kind of back that I like. And then there's Trey Harris, who was a portal guy who's come in and sort of juiced the offense this year. So I know those names. We know those names really well, but I have listeners that may not. So if you would sort of give us a little bit more information about that three-headed monster that the Rebels have this season.
Well, Jackson Dart was the 2020, the COVID year, Gatorade National Player of the Year. He's out of Utah. He went to USC. Whenever they changed coaches at USC and they brought Caleb Williams and all that drama happened, Jackson Dart's like, hey, I need to find somewhere else because Lincoln Riley is obviously bringing in his guy. He found Lane Kiffin. And they ran the air raid at USC, and anytime you get the air raid in your system, it's kind of like ethanol in a gas tank. It's really hard to do something other than the air raid at that point. So it took a year for Jackson Dart to kind of adapt to SEC football, to this RPO-centric offense and things like that. So the Jackson Dart that everybody saw last year, everybody, you know how this society is now. We all formed opinions his first year, and we're going to take those to the grave. Jackson Dart's not the quarterback that he was a year ago. You have somebody with remarkably similar numbers to Carson Beck, and I'm assuming most of the Georgia fan base is very high on Carson Beck at the moment. Jackson Dart's leadership, he has 3 come-from-behind wins in the fourth quarter this season, including against LSU, where Ole Miss was down by 9 points with 5 minutes to go in the game. Ole Miss won that game. And Jackson Dart is, I don't want to say he's everything to Ole Miss's offense, but he is that next level leader in the vein that that Stetson Bennett was for the Georgia Bulldogs last year, that Tim Tebow was, that mindset that he brings to everything on top of his talent has elevated Ole Miss's offense, which is always good because everybody knows Lane Kiffin offenses are good. Quinshon Judkins, like you said, I think he's the best running back in college football. He's definitely the best running back in the SEC. He got off to a little bit of a slow start this year because Ole Miss was injured up front. They were missing key players. Caden Priestcorn was injured for the first part of the season. When he came back, Ole Miss's run game started going. So he is going to have a major impact potentially on this football game, especially whenever Georgia had issues with Cody Schrader with Mizzou. Now, Quinshon coming into the game after Cody Schrader, that is probably something that Georgia is going to have to focus on, and in turn is probably going to open up another area that you can exploit because they're going to have to pay so much attention to Quinshon because Georgia's front seven, honestly, and this isn't a shot at Georgia, Georgia's front seven is not what it's been in the last couple of years. There's not a Jordan Davis. There's not a Jalen Carter or somebody sitting on that defensive line. Now their secondary is really good. They're kind of a back to front defense as opposed to a front to back defense. But that means that you can exploit them a little bit in the run game. Auburn did it a little bit. Obviously, Missouri did as well. Well, now the best running back potentially in college football is coming in, and Ole Miss has all the film of exactly how that has been done. So Georgia's going to have to man up and really focus to try and stop that run. I think Georgia will because Georgia's 4 and 5 star players. I mean, it's not a secret. It's like, don't be surprised when 4 and 5 star players play like 4 and 5 star players. But what that's going to do is make the play action more effective, make Caden Priestcorn more effective, make Jordan Watkins more effective because Trey Harris and Quinshon are probably going to be the focal point of the Georgia defense. And then you have Trey Harris on the outside. He has essentially played 6 games this season. He played 1 series against Tulane. He played 3 plays against Alabama, and he missed the Georgia Tech game because he got injured on that first series in the Tulane game. Other than that, or even with that, he has like 38 catches for 770 yards. If he'd have played those 3 games, he would be well over 1,000 yards already this season. And against Texas A&M, the guy just put on a show. And he's done that 2 or 3 games this year. So Ole Miss does have weapons, I think, to where they can affect the Georgia game, really similar to what Ole Miss was back in like 2014 and 2015, facing Kirby Smart. You have the outside, the big guy on the outside. You have the running back that can be effective, and you have a mobile quarterback that if he has a good game, an efficient game, can cause that defense a little bit of problems.
Okay. I mean, so we've got leadership at the quarterback position. We've got game-breaking ability at the skill positions. One of the things that appears to be a little uneven about this Ole Miss team is maybe they're not exactly the same on the road as they are at home. Really quickly, do you have any sort of insight into why that might be the case?
Well, I think that might be the case because they played at one-loss Tulane, who's a good football team. They played at Tuscaloosa, and they played at Jordan-Hare. Like, Jordan-Hare's that's a game that there was an interception. There was a bad pass that got tipped off, and it got picked up by Auburn, and they ended up going down and make it 14-14. That juiced up that crowd. It really similar to when Carson Beck threw the pick against Auburn this year, if you're a Georgia fan. But that was a game that Ole Miss was just getting ready to boat race Auburn. That was the play that let Auburn back into the game. So it's not necessarily an uneven performance. I think it has to do with the fact that the environments and the opponents they played. Because remember, Auburn had that Ole Miss game circled because of what happened last year.
Yeah.
Auburn desperately tried to get Lane Kiffin. Lane Kiffin told them, no, that place was jazz. They did stripe out the whole 9 yards. Hugh Freeze is on the other sideline, which there's no other school that he wants to beat more than Ole Miss. And that's a weird situation. So when you look at those road games, you have a situation that at Tulane. Tulane's a good ball team. They're probably about to put an 11-1 up. Ole Miss won that game by 17 points. They lost at Alabama. It's not a sin to lose at Alabama. Nobody can justify losing that game at all. And the game at Auburn, Ole Miss won the game. Ole Miss was the better team and kind of played about as bad of a first half as they can and still won that game. And that's a game that Ole Miss and teams in the past lose.
Fair enough. I mean, it's like we always say, it's hard to win in the SEC, especially
Mm-hmm.
on the road. So
Mm-hmm.
we've taken a look at the offensive side. Defensively, how do you think Ole Miss is going to attack this Georgia offense, which has really been efficient and consistent this season? And who do you think is going to make that happen if they can do it?
I think they're going to get after Carson Beck. Georgia's going to try and run the football because if Jordan can run the football, it's kind of Katie bar the door. That'll open up everything for that offense. But I think Ole Miss is going to try and affect Carson Beck. I think Suntarian Perkins, the true freshman, is an edge guy that can cause problems. Kari Coleman, Jared Ivey. By the way, there's 3 players on Ole Miss's defense that are Georgia Tech transfers, and I imagine this weekend probably means a little bit more for them. Like I expect Jared Ivey to be up because Georgia Tech hadn't had hardly a chance to cover the last couple of years, and now all of a sudden they're probably wanting to take out some frustration in that situation. But I think they're going to try and do something nobody else has been able to do, and that is to get Carson Beck to drop his eyes and worry about a pressure and move him off of his spot. And if that happens, maybe they can force an interception. Maybe they can force a long yardage, get Georgia off of the football field, because we're going to get into in a minute how I think Ole Miss can win this game. And I think I'm not saying it's going to be easy to do, but it's something that's pretty clear. If Ole Miss wins the game, this is pretty much what has to happen.
Well, it is a road game, and especially over the last 3 seasons. I mean, Kirby Smart has only lost 1 game in 3 calendar years. And obviously that means you're taking care of business at home. So really quickly, before we actually get into breaking down how it's going to shake out, what are your thoughts on the atmosphere that Athens and Sanford Stadium are going to welcome the Rebels with on Saturday?
Oh, that game's going to be jacked. 2 top 10 teams going, senior night. There's a chance that Brock Bowers is going to suit up and get on the field. I mean, that's going to give that adrenaline to the crowd. I mean, it should be a lot of fun. I mean, and this is a really cool thing for me because in the SEC, the 2 teams that are probably the most similar as far as the fan bases and everything, just the stuff outside of what happens between the lines, is Ole Miss and Georgia. I mean, Athens is is Oxford on steroids. I mean, there's a lot of similarities between the 2 schools, and I think it's going to be really cool that these 2 teams are playing a game that's meaningful in the month of November. And the atmosphere is going to be jacked up. And I do think that they're going to run number 19 out there. I don't think Brock Bowers is going to be effective. I just think it's senior night. They're going to give him essentially a curtain call so he can get that adoration and everything. But that is going to juice that crowd.
I think you got your finger on it there. I said as much on my podcast this week. I expect Brock to dress. No one has done more for the team than he has over the last 3 seasons, and he deserves his moment between the hedges with that jersey on one more time. So with that said, there's been a lot of talk this week about how this is the biggest game in program history for the Rebels, and if they win it, it will be the biggest win in the history of the football program at Ole Miss. So the question for me is, does this Ole Miss team have the ability to stand in with Georgia for 4 quarters and slug it out? Do they have what it takes to be there in the end? So, in your opinion, what determines the outcome of this game on Saturday?
You know, I tell my people on my show all the time, Ole Miss can win this game. Ole Miss can beat Georgia, and Ole Miss can do all of these things, but there's a difference between can, should, and will. And Ole Miss still has to do it, and this is how I think that Ole Miss can do it. Now, when you play a Kirby Smart coach team, whether it's Georgia now or back in the Alabama days and things like that, your star players have to be stars. You have to have players that can make plays. Missouri was in that game not necessarily because of anything special they were doing. They were in that game because Georgia's having a game plan for Theo Weiss and Luther Burden and stuff like that, and plays can be made. So you need star players to be able to affect this defense. And with Trey Harris and with Quinshon Judkins and Jackson Dart and this group, it's absolutely possible. Now, Ole Miss has to play clean, which means they need to do as well as they can in the atmosphere that they're going to see. It's going to be loud. No penalties, no turnovers, things like that. because Missouri, what did them in the fourth quarter? They got a little bit loose with the football. They threw a ball to a defensive lineman. And if that happens, it becomes an avalanche. When you play teams like Georgia, LSU, Alabama, momentum is an avalanche. It doesn't just go and ebb and flow and like that. It is like a tsunami that comes at you. So if you let them get up and excited for the game when they have 4 and 5 star players all over the field and they start playing like those 4 and 5 star players, you can be in a little bit of problem. So Ole Miss needs to play really clean. I think Ole Miss needs to avoid going forward on 4th and 1. I think 4th and 1 against Georgia is a trap. I think that Ole Miss needs to be okay with punting the football. And I think they have enough talent on the offensive side of the ball to make plays. Now, defensively, Georgia is a matchup team. They have pass rushers that they bring in, and they have run stoppers they bring in, and it's based off what you want to do. They also have a middle linebacker that is going to be calling the defense against a massively tempo team. This is, other than Tennessee, this is probably the fastest team you're going to face this year, and we might even be faster than Tennessee this year. Yeah. But with a new linebacker trying to get everybody lined up what they need to do in that tempo, not allowing Georgia to match up based off of down and distance and personnel grouping, I think that's an advantage for the Ole Miss offense. I think Ole Miss is going to be able to make a little bit of hay because Kirby isn't able to do the things that he is comfortable doing, the things that Glenn Schumann likes to do, and that is those matchup type principles. Now, I also think that Ole Miss is just due to win one of these games. And Georgia has this win streak has gotten to the point to where pressure is going to start to weigh on people's shoulders. The number just gets bigger than actually what it is. The streak becomes a huge thing. And no team has won 3 national championships in nearly 100 years. This is going to become a storyline as the season gets in. So if you can play a clean game, the offense takes advantage of Kirby not being able to match up. The tempo gives the middle linebacker problems. You're able to score some points, and your defense can affect Carson Beck by getting him off of his spots and making it a little bit different to convert those third downs that Georgia's converting at like 55% at the moment. You have a chance to get to the fourth quarter with this being a one-score game either way. And if that happens, the question is, does Georgia get tight? Do they see that all of their goals all of a sudden are becoming much more at risk than they thought they were 2 hours ago? And they start thinking, and somebody, Kenton Gibbs on the Locked On College Football Kickoff Show says, if you're thinking, you're stinking. And if that happens and Georgia becomes a half step slow and Jackson Dart has been really good in the last 5 minutes of a football game, I think that might be the avenue for Ole Miss to pull this off.
Well, Stephen, one thing's for sure. It's going to be a big matchup, and everybody's going to be watching the Dogs and the Rebels on Saturday night. Before we get out of here, if you will take a second, let the Dog people know how they can keep tabs on what's happening over there at Ole Miss and where they can find you on the old interwebs.
Yes, you can check me out on Locked On Ole Miss or wherever you get your podcast in there. We do a show every day. We do an interview roughly every night. We do a live stream on Tuesday nights. We do pregame, postgame shows, all of that good stuff. Basically, I'm just having way too much fun and way much more fun than I should be having talking about Ole Miss sports. So it should be fun. You're all welcome over there. We do perspectives all the time. Hey, and I am the first to admit it would not shock me if this game went just like the Kentucky game. It would not shock me if this game went like the Auburn game, but it also would not shock me if Ole Miss pulled off the game at the end.
Well, that's why I wanted to have you on, because I knew how I thought it was a dangerous game, and we just have to play it out and see what happens. And I appreciate the fact that you laid that out for the Dog fans here on the How About That and Dogs Cast one more time. So, Stephen, thanks again for being with me. Let's enjoy the games, and I'll see you on the other side, friend.
Yeah, take care, buddy.
Told them, how about them fucking dogs? That's what I told them.